At first, it looked impossible. In 50-degree heat, this watermelon field should have died in hours. The sand was burning, the wind was dry, the air looked like fire. And yet, at the end of this test, living watermelon vines were spreading across the Sahara, and a ripe watermelon was sitting in the middle of the desert. To understand how that happened, we have to go back to the start. On day 1, there was nothing here. Only empty orange sand, no shade, no water, no life. This land had not grown food for centuries, maybe longer, but the team came with a plan. They marked a narrow farming strip in the desert. They dug a long trench into the hot sand. Then they filled that trench with special black soil, built to hold moisture longer than desert sand. After that, they installed black drip irrigation pipes, deep enough to feed water directly to the roots of watermelon plants. Then came the first seeds, small watermelon seeds, dark, fragile, easy to lose in a place like this. But that was the beginning of the test. By day 3, the real battle had started. The sun was merciless. By noon, the surface sand became too hot to touch. In normal conditions, young watermelon plants would fail fast here. Their roots would dry out, their stems would collapse, their first leaves would never fully open. But this trench was different. The black soil was holding moisture below the surface. The drip lines were sending water only, not on top of the sand, not into the open heat, straight down near the roots of the watermelon seedlings. At first, the signs were tiny. A few weak green shoots appeared in the dark soil. They looked almost too small to survive, but each morning they stood a little taller. Then the pattern became clear. The watermelon seedlings were not dying. They were adapting, and in 50-degree heat, that was the first miracle. By the second week, the trench no longer looked empty. The watermelon roots had gone deeper. The stems had become stronger, and now, green watermelon vines were beginning to move across the desert surface. That changed everything. The leaves did more than grow. They created shade. That shade cooled the soil below. It slowed evaporation. It protected the root zone from direct heat. The drip system kept working. Small amounts of water, at the right times, never wasted. Then came the first watermelon flowers. Small, yellow, delicate, easy to miss. But in this place, they meant one thing. The plants were no longer just surviving. They were preparing to fruit. The desert was still brutal, but now it had a problem. Watermelon vines were spreading. Then came the next sign. Tiny baby watermelons began to appear behind the flowers. At first, they were almost invisible. Small, round, pale, green, easy to mistake for failure, easy to lose under the leaves. But day by day, they remained. That mattered, because in heat like this, fruit is where the system usually breaks. The vine can survive and still fail to harvest. The flowers can bloom and still never become food. But this time, the baby watermelons held on. The roots stayed cool enough. The black soil stayed moist enough. The drip lines kept the water precise enough. And that was enough for growth to continue. The team could finally see it now. This was no longer only a survival story. This was becoming a watermelon harvest story. For the first time, the desert field looked less like an experiment and more like a real farm. By the third week, the real test was no longer planting. It was control. In 50-degree heat, every mistake becomes visible fast. Too little water, and the watermelon shrinks. Too much water, and the roots weaken. A blocked pipe can damage an entire section of the trench, so the team changed their rhythm. They watered early in the morning, then again near sunset, at the hours when the desert was still harsh, but slightly less violent. That timing mattered. The black soil stayed damp longer. The roots stayed active. The watermelons kept filling. Now the fruit looked different, heavier, rounder, stronger. What once seemed fragile now looked solid. The field had crossed an invisible line. The question was no longer, will anything survive here? Now the question was, how good will the watermelons be? Then came harvest day. The desert looked the same as always. Dry wind, blazing light, endless orange sand. But inside the trench, everything had changed. The vines were thick, the leaves were broad, and beneath them sat the result of weeks of precision. The team moved slowly, one cut at a time. The stem was severed. The watermelon was lifted from the trench. It was heavy. That alone was a victory. In 50-degree heat, the fruit had not collapsed. It had not dried out. It had not failed. But the final answer was still hidden inside. Then the knife went in. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the watermelon opened. Inside was bright red flesh, wet, fresh, fully formed. The desert had not won. This experiment was not about luck, and it was not about one miracle tool. It worked because every part of the system supported every other part. The trench protected the watermelon roots from the burning surface. The The black soil held water longer than sand ever could. The drip irrigation delivered each drop with almost no waste. The leaves created shade. The roots stayed active below. The watermelon vines kept the fruit protected as it matured. Nothing here was random. This was controlled survival. That is why the result matters, because it shows that extreme heat does not always mean total failure. Not every crop will survive here. Not every desert can become farmland. But this field proved something important. If the root zone can be protected, if the water can be delivered precisely, and if the watermelon variety is chosen carefully, then even brutal land can produce food, not by magic, by design. So, can you grow watermelons in 50-degree heat? Yes, but only when every part of the system is built for survival. This experiment did not make the desert gentle. The sun stayed brutal, the wind stayed dry, the sand stayed hot. What changed was the space around the watermelon plant. A narrow trench, better soil, precise water, protected roots, careful timing. That small zone was enough, and maybe that is the strangest part of all. The desert remained the desert, but inside one controlled strip of land, watermelon vines still found a way forward. Not because the conditions became easy, but because the system became smart. That is the lesson of this field. Sometimes harsh land does not need to be defeated. It only needs to be understood. And in 50-degree heat, that understanding turned sand into watermelon harvest. After surviving 50-degree heat, this field gave us something almost impossible. Not just a watermelon, a real answer. And this is only the beginning. If you want to see more impossible farming experiments, more desert growing tests, and more extreme agriculture stories from the harshest places on Earth, then subscribe to this channel, because the next time we upload a new video, you will be among the first to see it. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.
We're proving that anything can grow here.
That's right. Please subscribe and join us.